Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Chris. And I'm very glad to be here today. Actually, when I was first asked, I wasn't able to come because I was meant to be in China teaching. We have a cohort of students over there that we go over every year to teach. But fortunately, or unfortunately, my wife managed to break her foot a month ago, so I wasn't able to travel. And you might think it's unfortunate by the time I finish speaking to you today. So, as Chris said, I'm also, as well as being Professor of Agricultural Economics, I'm co-director of the Lincoln University Centre of Excellence in Transformative Agribusiness, or CETA, which is less of a mouthful. I've just put this up here because they do give me funding for postdocs, so I think I should promote them while I'm here. And if anyone is looking for a postdoc position, we have one just advertised at the moment. And you may find the areas that we work in might be of some interest, and our website is there. So I really enjoyed this morning's session, and I think it's sort of raised a lot of issues that I will also touch on as I go through mine. I think the practical application, I think, was much better put than mine. I'm going to stay quite high level, I guess, in this discussion. When Andrew Curtis asked me to speak, he said he really wanted a value chain perspective on land use change, whereas much of the work, I guess, sits at that farm level, thinking about what farms' choices are, etc. But he wanted to actually think about the overall drivers on that change. So I begin with a brief discussion of why farm system change. I think looking at the group that are here, we don't need to spend too much time discussing why we need to change our systems, and a lot of work is obviously going on in that already. I would then sort of look briefly at a lot of work's been done on land suitability and the idea of its suitability for different crops and enterprises. But then really begin to think more about our value chain approach, and starting with our customers. What do our customers actually want? And then think about some of the options from promising to proven, and then perhaps some challenges and opportunities in our value chain. And I think I've got some conclusions at the end, but there may be more questions than conclusions. So we know there's a huge number of external and internal drivers that are sort of pushing our farm systems. We have a model that has been very successful over a period of time in the dimensions of, in terms of adding value, putting exports, producing food for 30 or 40 million. But of course, with that, we've had a wide range of challenges that have been emerging in our system, our challenges to biodiversity, challenges of water quality, water quantity, and obviously around natural resources more general. And so we're really facing a time, I guess, where we have sort of increasing regulation, pushing our farm systems to change, and at the same time, on the other hand, there's potential opportunities pulling our farm systems to change as well. And clearly, we have a lot of drivers, but these will vary quite considerably across stakeholders. And there's no one view about what change should be about and what we should be trying to achieve. And here, this is some work from our Land and Water, sort of highlighting the sort of drivers for change around our value chain. And we can see quite clearly there, greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, as major issues in that. So briefly, we think about this change. What if we just think about that climate change piece and think about what change might look like in that situation? We can think about mitigation and adaptation in this thing. In terms of mitigation, we might talk about alternative approaches to current land use enterprises, and we've seen the dairy discussion we've had already today. But then, obviously, and where I've been doing, I guess, most of my work since I arrived in New Zealand in 2015 has been really around alternative land uses, and these alternative land uses that may reduce emissions. There could be substitution, crop for livestock, etc., or integration, crops and livestock. But at the same time, what makes agriculture and farming more interesting is not only its impact on greenhouse gas emissions, but the way that climate also directly affects it. So this two-way interaction. And so We've got the idea of dealing with adaptation. We've got to think about adoption of land use enterprises that increase resilience. We've already heard that word today, and I think it is such an important word when we're thinking about our farm businesses. And so increasing the resilience to these changing climatic events that we're having. But also we could go beyond. I'm not going to talk much about this today, but diversifying away, I guess, from just relying on our farm business enterprises to other non-farm diversification. But I won't talk much about that today. I guess I'll start with this because I'm probably as guilty as anybody in around this. A lot of the work we were doing in next generation systems really was talking about what is possible on farms and looking at, a lot of work has been done around land suitability. But of course, just because you can doesn't mean you should, I suppose, when it comes to land use. Okay, and what I mean by this is a range of factors. I mean about, yes, the land technically, and we could go forward and see there's a wide range of crops and enterprises that can be grown all over New Zealand in a sense to perhaps help this transition from reliance on our pastoral-based systems. So we can grow virtually anything in one way here. But the question is, and in theory, we could show that they are profitable. And we did some work on the SLEMAC project highlighting that we can reduce emissions and increase profitability through these. But that is very much on paper, I guess is the question. The question is, does the market want this? Will the market pay enough to transition our systems to these new systems that potentially we have? Will they be more profitable than others? How do we deal with the risk in these new systems? Have we got infrastructure, etc.? So I kind of understand the work around suitability because it does give farmers and others information about what could be done. But I don't think it necessarily helps us that much in the transition process because really we need to understand where the markets are, where our competitive advantage are in these crops and enterprises before we begin to change. And of course, change isn't simple. There's no silver bullet when it comes to land use. They may have some advantages on emissions, but then maybe they're going to demand more water, etc. And again, that's always a complex decision for us. And I come back to this issue, we can't think about those land uses in isolation of what we're already doing and the land use competition that we have already. And I'll just take dairy as an example. Dairy offers so many benefits to those who are dairying, okay, in terms of you've got a ready market. You don't have to think every day about how I'm going to market that product, right? A lorry comes, takes it away, and that's the end of your marketing concern. Virtually any other enterprise that we're talking about, you are going to have to be thinking about how you market it and what's happening in the market, okay? You've got something that produces every day, you get paid every month for. Again, lots of our enterprises that we talk about, you may have one harvest a year. You've got something which is quite resilient in terms of risk as well. One frost is not going to wipe out your dairy for the year, but it could wipe out your cherries, etc. Okay, so there's many advantages around dairy, and we say in terms of the knowledge we've got, the financial, the market, very strong. Now we've got these other land uses, which perhaps meet some of our other requirements that are becoming increasingly stronger over time in terms of the environment, the social, and the regulatory. We have a lot of alternative systems that perhaps can hit those for us, but it's really hard to find them that give us the whole package. And I think that's a challenge for us because at the end of the day, decisions are made by land managers. Okay, economics is going to drive that decision about the move, and we're also going to have land uses that can give a return at least as good, or if not better, than what you can get at the moment. So when we're thinking about these land use changes, again, coming from a value chain situation, where's our competitive advantage? As saying, there's lots of different crops and enterprises we can grow. A lot of these may improve our environmental footprint, maybe more socially acceptable as well. But really, do we have markets for them? Do we have the infrastructure to go? If we're moving into horticulture, etc. We're going to need the pack houses, maybe processing, maybe manufacturing. We've got logistics. Clearly, we've had a lot of issues around labour in those sectors recently. Again, where's the labour going to come from? And can we produce at scale to be internationally competitive? Because yes, one person might be able to do this, but that's not going to satisfy our global value chains in a way. So a lot of questions for us when we're thinking about change and the change in our land use to perhaps these more benign systems that we could look at. I come back to one thing, I guess, and Mananui touched on it, I think, about should we be focusing on providing for our families first, our own communities, etc., our country. What we produce in New Zealand is not determined by what we want, effectively. It's determined by what the people who buy 80 or 90% of our products that are exported want, okay? And that's kind of where we have a bit of a conflict in our system. We have desires for our system around water quality or resource management, etc., but we have customers who decide really what is produced. And these are just, if we go back to our customers and start from here, it's the Chinas, the USAs, etc., Europe. What are they willing to pay for? What do they want? Now, of course, that can drive us both ways. You know, again, I've already mentioned today, our customers are becoming increasingly concerned with how their food's produced as well as where it's produced or what is produced. And so they can drive us positively as well. But they are really what's determining what we're producing here. So we did a bit of work for the SLEMAT project, really starting from this area, looking at where's the demand. And we sort of then began to identify a range of enterprises that could potentially offer decent returns, but also where we could see increasing demand. And we saw this increasing demand around, you know, growth in Asia, unique health benefits, premium high-value product, etc. And we took these just as exemplars. Now, the broader one around there, again, many of these could also have been taken into place. But we're trying to, I guess, take a starting point, thinking about where our markets were, and then thinking about what enterprises, what crops, products, etc., could fit into that. And we just did some work then to look at the climate greenhouse gas emissions of these and the profitability. But again, where we failed is, I did the economics of this, that's probably why it failed, but no, where we failed was I sat down and said, well, how profitable are blueberries? Well, I find some figures from somewhere and I'll make up a figure, you know. How profitable are cherries, okay? Cherries may fail once in every 5 years. How do we build that in? You've got to wait a number of years until you harvest them. How do you build that in, right? We kind of ended up taking figures for when it was up and running, right? Which it kind of, in a sense, overstates the profitability of this and doesn't take account of the risk associated with them as well. And I think that's a challenge when we're trying to think about these enterprises, a lot of them in particular. So when we're thinking about this, again, I keep coming back to it, can New Zealand compete? And I'll show some more work we've done recently looking at alternative proteins. So we're looking at oat milk, we were looking at pea protein, we were looking also not protein, but well, chestnuts for gluten-free flour, etc. And one of the questions we're asking there is, again, all crops that we can grow in New Zealand, right? All crops where we can see increasing demand, but really, has New Zealand got an advantage in these sorts of enterprise? And I guess I come from a farming background, so one thing that always kind of concerns me, yes, we might be able to have value it, but can we get that back to the grower? Because that's what's important to me, my own parochial view on these things. Okay, it's fine, but can we get the value back to the grower, and can we get it back to a way that encourages the transition as well? And you know, the challenge I think we tend to have is this moving from one commodity to another commodity, and someone else in the chain tends to capture that value, and it's not really necessarily benefiting the land manager. So some of the things we were considering there were, how could you arrange, you know, groups of farmers working together to supply processors, maybe getting better contracts, or do they move up the chain or down the chain into processing? And then you know, again, one of the questions we say, well, how do you capture value? And some of the people we were talking to about change in the next generation system was, you know, they wanted something where they could keep the intellectual property, because as soon as you lose the intellectual property, someone else is getting the value from you, from the chain as you go through. And again, coming to the pea protein, the chestnuts and the oat milk, one of the questions for us is the infrastructure. We need these chains into place. Yes, we grow them and we sell final products, but where we've got the big gap in New Zealand is the investment in the processing. Now, clearly, in Southland, we'll be hearing later, we've got, you know, the oat milk factory has been going ahead, and that may change. But really, you know, we haven't got a pea protein plant. Chestnuts, we could put through some of our flour mills, etc., but we haven't got that infrastructure in there, and so that's a challenge for us. Interestingly, again, when we're talking about investment and benefit and whether or not we can get advantage, if we can show, you know, the environmental and social credentials of what we could do, there may be other ways to get this money in, but that is a big challenge for us. You know, we can got lots of innovative alternative protein products, and we can grow the stuff. It's the bit in the middle where we are struggling with. And going back to how we can make farmers make change, yes, you know, again, we can have an oat milk factory, but if it's just going to pay the same for oats as our existing Harroway's oats that I feed my kids every morning in their porridge, is it really going to lead to land use transition, right? You know, is the pea protein, again, are we going to be able to generate enough revenue to get back to farmers to actually get them to change their systems that are going through? So for farmers, I guess there's the issue is how far and who with do you move down the chain? So you can have here potentially grower groups, individual or grower supply groups, right, that could work together, maybe guarantee, you know, supply to a processor for some better returns, etc. Or, you know, in pea protein, do you move into processing? Okay, and further, do you move into brand ownership? Now, you can probably capture more value as you move along this or up and to the right on my graph here, but obviously this is going to come with greater risks and greater investment needs. So how do we actually do that? And when we think about just taking those proteins as an example, is New Zealand going to be competitive? You know, there's a plant being built in Canada that can process 125,000 tonnes a year of pea protein, right? When they did the scoping for New Zealand, the scale they were thinking about was 15,000 tonnes, right? So, I mean, it's a huge, you know, we've already witnessing commodification of these products, okay, globally. So how's New Zealand actually going to compete with that? We haven't got the scale of cereal production that you would have on, you know, the prairies of America or even in Australia. You know, how are we actually going to produce at a way that we can actually make a change in here? And what I've kind of added in this graph, it's just something I was thinking off the top of my head, was, you know, each time we need to try and get a premium for New Zealand, we're kind of moving up. We've got three ceilings, what I call, which is fundamentally, we can import the raw materials, which a lot of it's going on already for these proteins. We can import the processed product and then make the final product, or we can import the final product, right? And each of those kind of fits a ceiling on what, a floor or ceiling on what we need to get in New Zealand, because unless we can guarantee provenance, and lots of these things can change because you can be made in New Zealand with lots of imported ingredients, you're not going to be able to capture the value of that. And so, again, what we're trying to say is that at the end here, you can see over the cost of the final product, there needs to be a premium to make it work for New Zealand, but are we able to get that based on our credentials, in a sense, in the way that we produce? Right, I would just... another challenge, I think, for us, and again, it kind of comes back to this issue with dairy, and it's very easy to market. When we were doing our work on next generation systems, we came across a lot of very innovative people doing a lot of really interesting niche products. So we have our ancient grains, or we have garlic, or we have all sorts of things kind of going on there. But what we were finding was the really difficult thing is to get something at scale that can make a difference to these farms, right? Because we've got 400 or 500 hectare farms out in Canterbury Plains. And in a sense, I would say they're doing exactly what we want from our farming system. So all the work I think I've read ever since I came from, was working in the UK or Ireland, what's the best type of system in our landscape for the environment? It's a mixed system, right? And we've got those out in the Canterbury Plains. We've got people with 11 or 12 different enterprises mixing livestock and crops, etc. But the difficulty they've got is they're struggling to maintain profitability. And that's the challenge for us. We want more of that. Now they're developing niches. But what you can find is a niche is really bloody hard work, okay? Because not only are you trying to understand how to grow that crop, you've also got to understand the market and marketing that crop, because no one's going to do it for you, right? And what we found with farms there was they ended up finding the niche was 10% of their farm, but was taking 80 or 90% of their time. And their other products were suffering because they were trying so hard to develop the niche. Now, there's a whole lot of stuff we won't go into about making successful niches, but that's a real challenge for us as well. And I kind of called it, the other challenge for us is the scaling up and scaling out. We've got lots of small products generally working well, but can we actually get them up to a scale where we begin to make a marked change to our land use in New Zealand? And I think that's a real challenge for us. When I talk about niche and individuals diversifying, well, there's many different ways we can diversify our landscape, okay? I'm not going to go through them here, but just individuals all having to develop a niche isn't one way. We can diversify what we call specialized diversification, where we have people who are growing particular crops. We can go from one farm to another and use their land to grow it. We can then get our integrated landscape, but each individual land manager doesn't have to have the skills to know how to grow those different crops. We can move it around. I think the final thing I want to really talk about is the role of the market and the role of government and the role of NGOs maybe in this. We need these changes. We've got where we are because of markets, right? Can markets get us out of here, right? I think is the challenge for us. Now we're seeing, more pressure occurring on our way we produce due to scope 3 and other sorts of things about greenhouse gas emissions, more pressure from our supermarkets in the UK about how we're growing our onions, etc. We can see markets pushing for change. But, will the markets give us the resilience that we require rather than the focus on efficiency that we've had before? I'm sceptical that it's going to be the answer for us, but then that leads us, we've had some very disparaging works about central government this morning, so kind of the role of the public side of this, I think, is really important, and how they fill that gap. But again, it's obviously not the government's role to decide and grow crops and process them and stuff like that, but how can they fill in where we've got some of these missing markets or some of these externalities to try and work it? And public-private partnerships might be the way that we think about that. So I'm going far too over time now, so I will just stop with a brief summary. I think we all understand that farm system and land use change is required. We've had a very successful model, in one way, but we've reached our limits in lots of other ways, and we need to change and think about how we deal with that. Land suitability, lots we can grow. I think Andrew Curtis used the word, we can grow anything, right? Virtually there's lots and lots of different things that we can grow, but we do need to think about it in the value chain approach. We also need to think about how we return that value to land managers within a very great imbalance of power in our food supply chains, and that's the real challenge for us as well there. And basically, there are roles and responsibilities for public and private sector, and I don't think the market's necessarily going to deliver that change we required. Again, if we tend to use our examples of our billion-dollar crops, kiwi fruits, etc., where we've got advantage there was because we had intellectual property and we captured that and kept it. So are we able to do that in a way? And again, we need to think about how we get competitive advantage for New Zealand in these products, because a lot of them we're not going to be able to compete on scale. So the question is, how do we get value in crops that meet our social and environmental needs? Okay, thanks very much.
have some questions. The one at the top is the one that's polled the most, so see if you can have a crack at that one.
Yes. Okay, I'll start at the top. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I think that's probably why I'm saying the market isn't going to deliver everything that we need. And we always, we've always, I guess, gone through this all the way through, if you ask consumers what they want, they will always tell you they want animal-friendly, environmentally friendly, socially acceptable thing. When they go and buy, they buy on price, right? And that's in developed countries as well as emerging markets like this. So I think that's the point. But at the same time, there are consumers who are demanding these products, okay? And again, lots of discussion you hear in New Zealand about value adding and, we're going to feed the richest 30 million or whatever it is. Now, I'm not exactly sure about that, but there are opportunities as people become richer, economies become richer for enhanced value. But yeah, I don't think the market's going to drive us everywhere we want to be. Yeah.
And maybe the second one?
Who pays for public goods? Yeah, no, exactly. I think one of the things, is my view is there's a missing market for public goods. I think Trish or Mark was raising the issue this morning, that there are increasing ways that maybe you can begin to create markets for some of these and then begin to actually capture some of the value, and whether it's through, ethical investment or whatever way. So you could begin to capture this. Now, this is a big discussion in Europe, right? Because, obviously they're in a very different system. We only, 2% of our agriculture output is supported, right? In Europe, 20-30% of agriculture output now. It used to be up to about 40%. Some countries, if you look at beef in Ireland, it's over 100% of the value of the beef comes from direct support. In that way, you can see that the taxpayers can pay for public goods, right? And they can have enhanced environment because they're paying farmers to do that. Here, I think it's more challenging. We haven't got that support level. So how do we get the change that we want to fill those externalities? I think is a challenge for us there. But hopefully, if we can turn it into markets, then you can begin to capture some of it. Greenhouse gas emissions from pea protein. Pea protein is about a half of the emissions of dairy. Okay, so I think we can indicate that it is overall, if you do a life cycle analysis of it, the emission is lower than our other systems. Now, there's a whole discussion about nutrition in this, and I think some of that's a little bit of a dead end and stuff. But again, you can think about climate emissions per nutritional bit you get from it, and there's a whole discussion about that. But I think the science is there. I don't know, people who read this may disagree, that emissions are lower in this situation. Okay.
Okay, I think we'll call it to a close. So once again, put your hands together for